threatening the peace and stability of Taiwan. Beijing has launched a number of missiles into waters near Taiwan in response to the visit, saying the US is playing with fire. US media reports the White House has summoned the Chinese ambassador to condemn the escalating actions. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the differences between the US and China need to be resolved peacefully.
The fact is, the speaker's visit was peaceful. There is no justification for this extreme, disproportionate, and escalatory military response. It is incumbent upon China to continue to seek to resolve those differences peacefully, not to use coercion, and certainly not to use force.
Antony Blinken there. Russia says it's willing to discuss a prisoner swap with the United States after American basketball star Brittany Griner was given a 9-year prison sentence for drug offences. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov warned the US against using what he called megaphone diplomacy, saying it could derail any negotiations. President Biden called Griner's sentencing unacceptable after the star was found at Moscow airport with a vape cartridge containing cannabis oil. A hosepipe ban for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight comes into force today. Southern Water says the country is experiencing one of the driest years on record, with river flows about 25% lower than they should be at this time of year. So it's asking customers to limit their water usage until further notice. The measure will follow next week for South East Water customers in Kent and Sussex. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. It's back to We Need to Talk About with Beth.
Good afternoon. This is Bev Turner with you on GB News on your radio and on TV. We've got a fantastic hour coming up. Everything you need to know about what's going on in the country right now. Of course, Tory leadership rivals Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss clashed last night over their competing plans to deal with the economic recession, which, of course, has been forecast by the Bank of England. They were in their latest TV debate. Liz Truss said that a recession was not inevitable if bold action was taken. She also pledged a package of tax cuts worth £30 billion soon after she enters office.
And what's important is, first of all, that we need to help people struggling with the cost of living. I would immediately reverse the national insurance increase. I would also have a temporary moratorium on the green energy levy to save people money on fuel bills. But I'd also keep corporation tax low to make sure that we are attracting investment into our economy and doing all we can to avoid a recession.
Meanwhile, Mr Sunak, who has trailed Liz Truss in recent polls, said that he would prioritise bringing down inflation before cutting taxes, would pour fuel on the fire of inflation, he said.
I think the government's number one priority should be grappling with inflation. That's what I want to do. But it all starts with not making the situation worse. Because if we just put fuel on the fire of this inflation spiral, all of us, all of you, are going to just end up with higher mortgage rates, savings and pensions that are eaten away, and misery for millions. I don't want that to happen. And that's why I am so focused on gripping inflation first.
So joining me now is columnist and political commentator Tim Montgomery. Tim, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining me. I've seen that clip of Rishi Sunak talking about gripping inflation a few times now, and I still can't quite work out his logic. We're not in an inflation spiral because people are spending too much. We're in an inflation spiral because of global events, also perhaps because of ridiculous lockdown policies which have led us into this situation now. Is this a little bit of an old-fashioned economic theory to raise interest rates at this moment, to stop people spending more? We need people spending money to keep our businesses afloat right now, don't we?
Yeah, I think I largely agree with you, actually. You know, we're living through unprecedented times because of the nature of the pandemic, still because of the monetary easing policies that central banks have pursued throughout the world. Things are happening in economics that don't necessarily conform to the rules of the past. So I have a lot of sympathy with what you said, Beth. But to be honest, whatever happened in last night's debate, and I think overall I watched it, I thought Sunak actually did quite well overall. It's been blown out of the water by this gaffe that he's made in Tunbridge Wells that's just been featured on the GB News bulletin.
You should say that, Tim. We haven't come to that yet, and we're going to let our viewers...
Oh, sorry, I'm preempting you, am I?
No, don't worry. Don't worry. That's what we call a tease in TV land, Tim. You did it beautifully. We are going to show our viewers that in just a moment after your tease, the blunder that he made in Tunbridge Wells. But let me just talk about last night a little bit more. Liz Truss was really talking about some good old-fashioned policies, wasn't she? She's talking about keeping down not capital gains. What do I mean? I mean corporate tax. Sorry. Thank you, fellas. Corporation tax, keeping down corporation tax to get businesses working again. And also she's talking about scrapping the green levy, which is sort of a fairly modern thing that a lot of people don't have a lot of time for at the moment when we can't afford to pay our electricity and gas bills.
Look, I think green levies and action on climate change in the way that we are currently pursuing it would be completely justifiable if all of the world was acting together. And then that way, the people of Britain, as you say, facing higher and higher energy bills, would be making sacrifices that could be justified. But I really have never understood, and no one's better to answer this question for me, why should poor families in Britain struggling to pay all of their energy bills have to do so when China, which is now the world's leading emitter, is continuing to build coal-fired power stations? So any good that we do at enormous expense to hardworking families is completely overridden by Beijing. It makes no sense at all. And until we get China on board to fight global warming, we should be much more sensitive to the economic hardship these policies are causing our own people.
It's a very good point, Tim, and I know that a lot of our listeners and viewers will agree with you. I suppose the logic being we have had a couple of hundred years, actually, of industrial revolution in this country in which we were allowed to use coal to the extent that we built ourselves into the fifth largest economy in the world. And China would say, well, we want to have a little bite of that cherry first before you tell us to cut back. But obviously, it's a very controversial topic. Right, Tim, we're coming on to what you already teased for the News viewers. This is Rishi Sunak talking in Tunbridge Wells to some Conservative Party members. I'm sure he said what he thought the crowd wanted to hear, but this is how it came out.
I managed to start changing the funding formulas to make sure that areas like this are getting the funding that they deserve, because we inherited a bunch of formulas from the Labour Party that shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas, and that needed to be undone. I started the work of undoing that.
Oh, that's really bad, isn't it? We were putting the money into areas of deprivation and I've had to start undoing that. Tim, do you want to try and defend what he was trying to say to the people of Tunbridge Wells, or is it indefensible? Where's Tim? Maybe he fell off his chair in a way that I nearly did. There he is, he's back. Tim, is it indefensible? Or is there any way that... In fact, let me ask you a different way. How will he come out and explain what he was trying to say to make it sound fair?
I think, and this may be what he meant, I think if I was his spin doctor, what I would say was he was talking about deprived rural areas. So I think there is a case that you could make that... urban areas have been favoured, deprived urban areas have been favoured over deprived rural areas in the past. And I think, rural poverty, perhaps not in Tunbridge Wells so much, but rural poverty in various parts of the country is a very real phenomenon. But of course, the quote, it sounded awful. I think if Stephen Pound was trying to devise, sat there with you, I think, if he was trying to devise, a clip that would confirm every prejudice that the Labour Party has about the Conservative Party, a beautiful scene in Tunbridge Wells with a Tory candidate for Prime Minister talking about taking money from urban areas to give to rich Tories. He couldn't come up with a better clip. So although there's a justification for it, this is gold for Labour, absolute gold. And Rishi Sunak's campaign is dead. Over. This is it.
OK, well, I think you're probably right, Tim. I can't wait to hear what Stephen Pound is going to say about this. These two are giggling in the cheap seats right here. So I'm going to say goodbye to you for now. Tim Montgomery there, political commentator and columnist. Thank you very much. Well, fellas, I should introduce you officially, really, shouldn't I? I am joined in the studio this afternoon by Stephen Pound, former Labour MP, and Alan Mendoza, Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society think tank. Stephen, over to you. As Tim said there, you couldn't come up with a more damning clip, could you?
If I was Rishi Sunak's spin doctor, I'd be looking to end-of-life care. But the problem is, this whole thing is coming apart like a flat-pack wardrobe. It's embarrassing to watch. But what I think the really terrifying thing about this is how badly he misjudged it. Now, there is a Labour group on Tunbridge Wells Council. My cousin Hugo is the leader of the Labour group, Councillor Pound, leader of the Labour group on Tunbridge Wells Council.
Right.
The people there, they don't believe in this business about, let them sweat and suffer in Glasgow, Manchester, Liverpool and Birmingham. They actually have a much more henotic, much more liberal perspective on life. And what they're worried about in Tunbridge Wells is the Liberals. And to actually, as well as obviously the resurgent Labour Party, so to actually come up with this red meat stuff about, rural poverty in Tunbridge Wells, where sort of noise nuisance is playing Rachmaninoff in the wrong key, and sort of the food banks are mostly privately owned. It's this ridiculous situation. But he totally misjudged it, and it's a real shame because, from the Labour Party point of view, a lot of us feel like sort of the eunuchs at the orgy. We're just sort of bystanders while all this is going on. But in reality, if we can put party politics aside for a second, what the hell does this say about our country? And what does it say about the way we're going into a terrifying recession when we've got people there who frankly can't string a sentence together and totally misjudge their audience and cannot get their argument over?
Alan?
Well, the clip speaks for itself. The only thing I can say is, having not seen the context, the sentences before the clip, I'd be interested to just see those before rushing to judgment. But clearly this is a very open error, and, Stephen is right to sort of highlight, and Tim is right to highlight, this is, not Rishi Sunak's finest hour. And, of course, the question, therefore, is, I think there's another bigger question here. Things like this are, again, illustrating, are they not, why this whole way the Tory leader is chosen is ludicrous. You've got 6 weeks of blue-on-blue violence, as it's called, where, gaffes are going to be called out. People are under intense pressure. They are basically running a general election campaign in
460,000 people.
Correct, exactly. I think the Conservative Party would do very well to consider how the leader is elected going forwards and not have this lengthy general election-style 6-week campaign where things like this will be seized upon by the opposition.
It's Britain's got no talent, isn't it, really? It's a depressing witness whatever side of the political spectrum you sit on. There is no good coming of this.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. Look, I think that the point here...
Stephen's quite happy right now, as you say.
Yeah, but let me just quickly... very quickly.
I'm a patriot first and a politician.
Yeah, that's right.
But the point of this is that when you're the Prime Minister running, or a leader of opposition running a general election campaign, you do have the support structures around you to keep you going in a very pressured environment. And of course people have made mistakes. We've all seen Prime Ministers of various parties make mistakes during campaigns. Yeah. I think we have to look at the human element here. These are two people who don't have the support structures that the Prime Minister or the leader of the opposition do have in an election campaign, and they're expected to do in this way. There's a lot of pressure on them. There's a lot of focus on everything they do and say. I think from a national perspective, this isn't sensible either.
But let's go back. In 2008, Tony Blair stood down as Prime Minister. We had exactly the same situation in the Labour Party. We had 1.5 candidates ready, because Gordon Brown was the candidate of 99.9%, and John McDonnell, well, I think he had his vote, possibly he had his vote anyway. But at that particular time, in the Parliamentary Labour Party, we said we cannot afford to have red-on-red warfare here. We cannot afford to have this out there. And so, in fact, I remember Gordon Brown's office ringing me, saying, why haven't I supported Gordon publicly? And I said, well, there's no competition, is there? I said, there's only John McDonnell. I was told, yes, but Gordon is going to grind him into dust. That was then. But the reality is, red on red, blue on blue, it looked terrible. And why on earth the Conservatives have allowed themselves to get into this situation?
Well, why have they, Alan?
Well,
what was the alternative?
Well, the alternative would have been too late. You can't change a leadership contest, when one occurs. You've got to have plans for this going forwards. And I think in the past, there have been circumstances that means this way has really not been tested excessively. Of course, we had the David Davis, David Cameron one, but that was in a slightly different age. That was 17 years ago now, when everyone's views were not scrutinised quite the same way. Theresa May got coronated, basically, without anything happening to her, because, there was an early self-destruction there, if you remember. Andrea Leadsom had made a comment in a newspaper that meant she basically withdrew from the race at that point. So,
right.
Which was bad. And then, of course, the Jeremy Hunt thing, it was so obvious Boris was going to win that, it didn't really matter. I think nobody really thought, well, what happens if there's a genuine sort of contest, at least at the start it looked like there would be, and how does this play out over that time? And I think clearly the lesson is after this one to go, right, you've got to change your policies right now. But you can't do it mid-election. It doesn't work.
No. OK, fellas, well, I might not get a word in edgeways in the next hour with you two here, but that's all right. You are listening to and watching GB News on TV and radio. Coming up in a moment, after the Bank of England's stark warning that we will fall into a recession this year, we're going to be discussing how much worse the cost of living squeeze is set to get. But time for a short break now and a check on the weather forecast.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather outlook. Not much rain in the forecast across the south. A dry one here today and sunny for most of us through this weekend, thanks to a large area of high pressure that's slowly moving in across the country, and it's going to stick around through the weekend and beyond. This weather front will bring a bit more cloud tomorrow across the north. And today across the north, we do have some showers. We've already seen one or two heavy ones and a scattering of showers over North Wales, northern England and parts of central and eastern Scotland will continue. Hit and miss, not everywhere seeing them, but where they do occur, so the odd heavy one is possible, but tending to ease off, I suspect, through the afternoon. Sunny spells for western Scotland, Northern Ireland and across the south, where temperatures getting into the mid-20s, high teens, low 20s for most. So actually a little cool for the time of year. It'll be a fairly cool evening as well. Still a few showers around this evening if you're heading on the roads across northeast England, eastern Scotland, but they'll quickly fade away. For most, it's going to be a dry night, but that weather front we saw earlier will start to bring the rain back to the highlands of Scotland and the Western Isles through the early hours. A fresh start to the weekend. It really will be quite a cool night, certainly compared to earlier in the week. Temperatures widely down to single figures. A sunny start to the weekend, certainly for most of England and Wales. A cloudy start for Scotland and Northern Ireland. There will be some rain pushing through parts of Scotland, but come late morning it'll mostly be confined to the far north, with just a few showers likely through the central belt. The odd shower for Northern Ireland, mostly dry here. Certainly sunny spells for the majority across England and Wales. And after a cool start, feeling pretty warm from mid-morning onwards into the mid-20s through the afternoon. On Saturday evening, again, most places set fair, just a bit more of that rain lingering across northern Scotland, where it'll also be fairly breezy. There'll be some patchy rain across northern and western parts of Scotland on Sunday, but otherwise, again, most places dry, and we are going to see temperatures starting to rise through the weekend into next week.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. You're with me, Bev Turner, on GB News. Thank you for joining us. Now, after the Bank of England's bleak warning that the UK economy is facing its longest recession since the 2008 global financial crisis, and with inflation now set to hit more than 13%, it's not cheery, is it? For millions of households already struggling with the cost of living crisis, this is the last thing that we want to hear. For many small businesses in particular, the looming recession will bring with it much uncertainty. So let's go and talk now to our GB News reporter, the fantastic Paul Hawkins, who is in Malden in Essex. Hello, Paul. You've been speaking to some small business owners down there who could be feeling the pinch this year. Where is it hurting them particularly?
Yeah, it's no surprise, Bev, that it's energy. Energy is the big cost. And what we need to really hammer home to those who don't run their own businesses is that, of course, our household bills are protected by the price cap. So household bills are off the scale. We know that, right? It's really hurting. But there is a price cap there, which at least protects us from some of the rises in the wholesale price of gas and electricity. But the problem for businesses, there's no price cap in place. So a lot of businesses are seeing their energy like triple, 4 times, 5 times as much, especially energy intensive businesses such as, we spoke to a blacksmith who told me that his energy costs have gone up 3, 4, 5-fold. And either they pass that cost on to their customers or they absorb it themselves. But when energy prices are going up so far, there's only so much they can absorb, and inevitably prices are going to go up. And of course, what's that going to do? That's going to feed inflation, which is the big enemy at the moment. And that's why the bank has raised interest rates. So the big cost for businesses is energy at the moment. Also, businesses are having problems with other issues as well. The wholesale cost of getting food, fuel, of course. Fuel is so expensive, so transporting the stock that they need to the shops so that they can then sell it on, that's pushing up the prices of stock as well. And then we spoke to one business owner earlier, a guy who designs furniture, gets it made in India, then imports it over to the UK. And he said that recruitment was a big problem. The costs of recruitment, especially that national insurance rise, we have to pay national insurance, but the employers have to pay more national insurance as well. He was really struggling with that, and he wants to recruit. He wants his business to expand, he wants to hire people, but that prohibitive cost means he can't. And of course, that means his business can't grow. And the key word, the way we're going to get out of this, of course, is growth, economic growth. If businesses don't grow, then the economy doesn't grow. And that's a great example of how, if that national insurance cost wasn't there for him, then he'd think about recruiting.
OK, all right. Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much for joining us, Paul Hawkins, down there. Now, listen, joining me is Helen Barnard, Deputy Director of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, which is a charity aimed at tackling poverty in the UK. Hello, Helen.
Hello.
Hello. It's pretty bleak, isn't it? What are you hearing at the moment from people that you work with who might come to your charity for help?
I mean, it is exceptionally grim. So we did some large-scale polling in May to see how people were doing. And we found that already about 7 million people were going without essentials. So going without food or being able to afford to have showers or toiletries, those kinds of things. So that's, as many people as live in the whole of the north of England. And the other thing that we're hearing a lot about is debt. So more than 4 million people already in arrears with their bills. And they've got an average debt of about £1,600 already. And people getting into more debt, including high-cost debt, to cover essential spending. So that is all before we see what's coming down the line this autumn.
There's no doubt, Helen, that obviously we know prices are going up, our bills are going up. It can be crippling to even fill the car with a tank of petrol for some families at the moment. But what we also have is a labour shortage. There are jobs available out there. Are there enough people keen enough to do jobs that they may not want to do to make a little more money?
Well, with the labour market, one of the most concerning trends is we are seeing fewer people in the labour market. And a lot of that seems to be driven by more people with long-term illness. So that's something that has really gone up a lot during the pandemic, and it's continuing now. And there's probably a couple of things happening there. One is we know there are people with long COVID, so people who are suffering that kind of long-term illness because of COVID. But we've also got the NHS backlog, and we've got the NHS really struggling to treat all of those people. So you have an awful lot of people who, many of whom would like to work, but they're currently too ill to work. On the other hand, you've also got some employers are now moving to more flexible work practices. Now, some of that could help as things go forward. But we do need to get to grips with why so many people are finding themselves in long-term illness, and that's taking them out of our labour market, because we need them. We need them back in the labour market.
I agree with you, and I'm sure that there are a lot of people who have had treatment neglected during lockdowns, particularly serious illnesses, cancers and such. But I find the long COVID excuse pretty flimsy. I can't deny it. There's very little evidence to show that long COVID is causing people to stay off work. So give me your response to that.
I mean, I think the statistics from the health service shows that it's in the thousands, I think just over 100,000 people who've had long COVID. And it tends to be, people are out for weeks or a couple of months. And obviously that doesn't mean you're out of the labour market forever, but it means you're out for a bit. But some of the other trends, I think, have started pre-pandemic and have been getting worse. Things like mental health. And that's one of the things, actually, when we got the recession coming down the line, we know from previous recessions that the kind of hardship that's caused by recessions can then feed into people's mental health getting worse. And debt. There's a really close link between debt and those financial problems making your mental health worse. And once you get into having a difficulty with your mental health, you don't recover just like that. And we also know that within the health service, getting access to therapy, getting access to treatment for mental health is very hard, particularly if you're not yet at, complete crisis point. So you've got this kind of confluence of things happening where we've got the economy nosediving, you've got prices going up, you've got debt rising, and you've already got more people experiencing things like mental health problems, which are going to be made worse. And you've got the NHS struggling to keep up. So I think it does all add up to a pretty grim year we've got ahead of us.
OK. All right. Thank you, Helen. Helen Barnard, the Deputy Director of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. You are with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Coming up, we're going to be getting the latest on the Archie Battersby case after his parents lost their High Court bid to move Archie to a hospice for end-of-life care. Now it's time to check on the news headlines.
Hello, it's 2:32. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Archie Battersby's family have lodged an appeal with the Court of Appeal after losing a High Court bid to have him transferred to a hospice. The 12-year-old's family had pledged to fight to the end so he could spend his final moments with dignity. This morning, a judge ruled it was not in Archie's best interests to be moved to a hospice. He has been in a coma since April and has been the subject of a lengthy legal battle to continue his life support. The two candidates vying for Conservative Party leadership have clashed over warnings of a recession. The Bank of England predicts the UK will face its longest recession since the financial crisis in 2008, as it raised interest rates by 0.5 percentage point to 1.75%. Former Chancellor Rishi Sunak warned his rival's economic plan would damage the country, but Liz Truss argued her plans provided the bold action needed to tackle rising prices. China's foreign ministry has announced the country is severing a number of diplomatic ties with the United States following the US House of Representatives Speaker's trip to Taiwan. The country has also sanctioned Nancy Pelosi and her immediate family, accusing her of interfering in China's internal affairs and threatening the peace and stability of Taiwan. Beijing has launched a number of missiles into waters near Taiwan in response to the visit, saying the US is playing with fire. US media reports the White House has summoned the Chinese ambassador to condemn the escalating actions. A migrant in a kayak has been rescued from the English Channel this morning. Border Force picked the man up around 5 miles off the coast of Kent after he'd paddled across from France overnight. He's been taken to the processing centre in Dover for medical checks. He was one of around 1,200 migrants who crossed the Channel in just 2 days this week. Well, let's bring you some breaking news. In the last few minutes, the Unite Union have announced workers will strike for 8 days from the 21st of August at the port of Felixstowe in a dispute over pay. It's the busiest and biggest container port in Britain. We'll bring you more news on that story as the day progresses. TV, online and DAB plus radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to We Need to Talk About with Bev.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good afternoon. You are watching Bev Turner on GB News. It is 2:37. Now, the parents of Archie Battersby have lodged an appeal against the High Court's decision not to allow them to move their child from a hospital to a hospice for end-of-life care. The 12-year-old's family had pledged to fight to the end so he could spend his final moments with dignity, in their words. Archie's been in a coma since April after his mother found him with a ligature around his neck. It's believed that he was taking part in a TikTok challenge. Since then, there has been a lengthy legal battle to continue his life support. We'll go now to our reporter, Ellie Costello. She is outside the Royal London Hospital for us. Hello, Ellie. I spoke to you earlier this morning, and at that point, we didn't quite know, I think, what the Battersby family were going to do next. They've now lodged another appeal.
Yes, Bev, a lot has happened today in just a few hours, and as we said earlier, the Battersby family, especially Archie's mother, Holly Dance, she said she would fight this until the very end, so it perhaps comes as no surprise to anybody that they have submitted this appeal to the Court of Appeal this afternoon. It's after they lost their High Court bid this morning. It was about 11:30 they lost that bid, and that was all about transferring Archie from the Royal London Hospital behind me to a local hospice. And the parents feel really passionately about this because they want Archie to have a dignified and peaceful goodbye. They think that's what he can receive in a hospice. The hospital have always said that that's not in Archie's best interest. They say that even moving him in the bed is very difficult, and transferring him to a hospice carries significant risks. That's what both sides said this morning, and the judge at the High Court said she was satisfied that staying at the hospital was in Archie's best interest. I'll bring you a little bit of that judgment. She said, when considering the wishes of the family, why those wishes were held, the facilities at the hospice and what Archie is likely to have wanted, the risks involved in a transfer and the increasing fragility of his medical condition, on an balancing exercise, his best interests remain at the hospital when treatment is withdrawn. So that's what the judge said this morning. Well, after that legal bid failed in the High Court, Holly Dance did give us this statement. She said, "We are broken, but we are keeping going because we love Archie and we refuse to give up on him." The judge then gave the parents until 1:30 this afternoon, so less than 2 hours, to get together a separate appeal, which could go to the Court of Appeal. And we know that the parents have met that deadline. That has now been passed on to the Court of Appeal. We know that it's going to be heard by 2 justices in the Court of Appeal. It's going to be determined by those 2 justices on paper, which means that the judgment will be handed down on paper presumably to try and make this as quick as possible for everybody involved, because the longer this goes on for, it's almost as though it's the sadder it gets. We've seen the parents come down, Holly Dance come down after every legal application and speak to the press. She hasn't been able to do so for the past 2 days. It seems to be getting, understandably, much harder and much sadder for the family the closer this gets to the end. But ultimately, Bev, these two justices will decide this afternoon where Archie Battersby dies. Will it be in the hospital behind me, or will it be in a hospice? But it is just another few hours of mental anguish for the parents as they wait for that decision.
Thank you, Ellie. Thanks ever so much. Ellie Costello there down at the hospital. Alan Mendoza's still with me. You're a dad. What's your response? I can't quite work out the logic. It's too risky to move him, and yet you are not agreeing to continue his life under any circumstances.
This is a terrible, terrible case. And here's an example of why is it that once a decision's been made to essentially terminate someone's life, or in this case, they claimed he wasn't alive, essentially, or he was brainstem dead, where does it matter where he, at this point, passes? From their own logic, he's dead. Therefore, why can't the family's wishes be accommodated so that he dies with some dignity, as opposed to being in that, or his, in this situation? It's a terrible state, and no parent, no normal person would look at this with any kind of, sense of anything other than horror at what's unfolding. Just let him go.
Yeah, and let him go in the way that will give the family some sort of peace of mind for all of them, not just his mum and dad, but for his siblings. Let him have a good death. That's what I've been saying in the last few days on this channel this week. It's, judges have an interesting relationship, though, with medics. I've been part of a legal case trying to call for a judicial review into COVID vaccines for children, because for us, the legal team, the data didn't stack up. The risk-benefit analysis was not valid. And what happens in court, we found, is that when judges are presented with medical evidence, judges will say, but I am not a doctor, I couldn't possibly question what the doctors say. There is a very big case of white coat syndrome, and I can only imagine that a little bit that's what's happened here.
But here's a different point in the sense of the judges have already accepted the medic's point of view. They've said that he is brainstem dead. So at this point, they can go, right, we've accepted your point there. It doesn't meet any test of logic or natural justice.
Or rationality.
Or rationality at this point.
OK, thanks, Alan. Right, now, international affairs now. China, well, for now, China has restarted their military drills around the north, southwest and east of Taiwan, but they've claimed that it is only to test the troops, that was the quote, joint combat capabilities. The White House has now summoned the Chinese ambassador to express their disapproval, over the situation. And Nancy Pelosi has also said that China will not be able to stop officials from visiting Taiwan in the future. A little earlier today, China announced that they would halt cooperation with the US on climate change, talks over cross-border crime prevention, repatriating illegal migrants and suspending dialogue between senior military commanders. So joining me on the show now is Colonel Simon Diggins, who was former defence attaché in Kabul. Hello, Simon.
Good afternoon, Bob.
Good afternoon. The timing of Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan seemed very odd, and it seemed that the only conclusion would be that it was really about her. It was her vanity project. It was her trip, and effectively, to hell with the consequences, particularly for the Taiwanese people. Is that unfair?
I think it's very unfair. I mean, I think there's two things going on here. I mean, clearly, China as a country has a belief that Taiwan should be part of China based on a certain view of history, rather like Russia's view of Ukraine should be part of history. Other people disagree, and the Taiwanese people themselves, while they've been very careful not to provoke the People's Republic of China, have also got a very clear sense of their own self-identity and indeed their own history, which precedes the transfer of power to the Communist Party in the 1940s. The second point, which is really, really important, is what Nancy Pelosi was doing, was supporting a democratic view of how world should be organised. So the Congress, even though the US government itself had in the past taken what you might call a sort of ambivalent or even ambiguous view about China's claim on Taiwan, Congress was much more clear and said that we will continue to support them with defence and everything goes with it. Now, Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House of Representatives. She represents, if you like, the considered democratic mandate and view of the American people. I think it's really important that when you're democratic countries like our own, like the Americans, make clear to autocrats like President Xi or Putin in the case of Russia and Ukraine, that the democratic will is more important than their autocratic view of the world. So I fear I strongly disagree with you on that one, Bev.
I get the ideology. I understand what you're saying about the fact that democracies have to stand up to countries such as China. But right now, when there is already a war, perhaps a war against America, or by proxy between America and Russia going on in Ukraine at the moment, why would she now want to go and stoke another potential fire? Because regardless of how you look at this, China's response has not. They are making it very clear that they've seen this as an act of provocation, her visit. That's how they have taken it.
The Chinese are always going to claim this as a response. I mean, I'm not sure the details of the exact timing of the invitation. As I understand it, the invitation has been outstanding for a long time. The Chinese are always going to react like this. The Chinese have always got this view that no interference in internal affairs. That's a long-standing view of the Chinese Communist Party and their approach, that countries should not interfere in other people's internal affairs. That makes it very difficult, therefore, to have conversation with the Chinese about things where, for example, human rights and the abuse of the Uyghur population in Western China. They say, and they always state, this is a matter of internal affairs. They say the same thing about Taiwan, because their view of Taiwan is actually an integral part of the Chinese state. And indeed, that was also the argument when we protested against their abysmal and extraordinary sort of withdrawal of the rights of the Hong Kong people. So I fear when we're dealing with China, you're always going to have this reaction. So, I mean, I don't see it as a sort of personal crusade by Nancy Pelosi. I do see this as an important statement of democratic countries saying to other democratic people that this is important. I don't say it's ideology. That's fundamental to how we do our business.
OK, Simon, thank you very much. I'm just stay with us for a minute. I don't need to go anywhere because I want to bring Alan in. Do you agree with what you heard there from Simon? Because my concern is that this was a situation, this was an animal, a bear that did not need poking right now, given everything that's going on globally, given everything that's been going on economically, unless they wanted to cause more chaos. Is that what the outcome of this is going to be?
No, the outcome will not be more chaos. What the Chinese are doing is just recovering lost face, basically, which is the very sort of, necessity for Xi to show to his people that he's, kind of putting grand Chinese ambitions first in this sort of regard. So they're doing this to make a point, which is, well, you've, come into our area, we're going to come into yours as well. I take the point that, you might not want to poke bears or dragons in this case. But there is something important we've learned from the Ukraine lesson, which is, for a long time, we allowed Vladimir Putin to basically get his own way on Ukraine and tell us what, I'm going to slice a bit off here, I'll take a bit there. And we did very little to prevent him from going forwards. I think one lesson of Ukraine is that the free world has to be much more open about what it values in its defence and be much more clear to others to say, look, this is a red line and you can't cross it because we are going to be defending the other side. There was that element of ambiguity over Ukraine, if you recall, which perhaps encouraged Putin. Well, there should be, visits like this show there should be no such ambiguity to China. China may well wish to invade ultimately, but it won't be able to do so on the basis it won't know what the Western response is.
But what if China now starts to impose sanctions on the West? I know this, as we have done on Russia. What does that mean for us here, given that we buy so much from China?
Yeah, but it won't, because for that very reason, because we buy so much for China. So China's not going to cut off its own markets right now for something that is a minor infraction as far as the real issue goes. Nancy Pelosi going, they've made a very big thing about it. I mean, Simon is right. Anything they can turn into that kind of advantage. There is no prospect of China whacking on massive sanctions on us. It would hurt them more. Remember, their own economy is in a terrible state as well. COVID is rampant there. They're trying a crazy zero COVID strategy that isn't going to work, as we've all known for a long time. Industrial output's down. This is not the time for them to be doing that because the Chinese regime needs stability, not instability.
OK. All right. Thank you, Alan. And we couldn't go back to Simon. I'm so sorry. It's only a short show. Bye, Simon. You were great. That was Colonel Simon Diggins, former Defence Attaché in Kabul. I've not seen him on GBNews before. He was brilliant. I hope to see more of him. OK, let's talk. We've just been talking to Alan, but we're going to move on now. A migrant has been rescued from a kayak in the English Channel this morning after paddling across from France overnight. He was one of around 1,200 migrants who crossed the Channel in just 2 days this week. It comes as both Tory leadership candidates say they are committed to tackling the small boats crisis. So joining us now live from Dover is our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Hello, Mark. Good afternoon. It seems extraordinary that someone will paddle more than 22 miles across the English Channel. Do we know who this gentleman was and how long it took him?
Yeah, we don't know who he is, nor will we be told by Border Force, but certainly an indication of his desperation. He set off last night from the French coast and was paddling through the night. He got as far, actually, as 5 miles off Dover before he was spotted by the authorities and then picked up by Border Force and taken here to Dover. He is one of 1,200 people who have made that crossing in just 2 days, because although it's a great day today, it's actually quite windy, pretty windy out in the Channel, and there's only been 2 days this week where the conditions have been calm enough for the migrants to come across on their small boats. Well, they took advantage of that, and 1,200 have crossed in those 2 days.
Obviously, it's August, and that will play a part in this, the fact that this is high season, if I can put it that way, if you're attempting to cross the Channel in a flimsy boat. Surely that doesn't come as a surprise, though. Does it mean at this time of the year we put more border control officials in the area? What kind of resources are put down there, Mark, where you are right there? That's where the boats are landing. What measures are taken at this time of the year when we know that the numbers increase?
Well, there has been over the years an increase in Border Force personnel down here to deal with the increase in the numbers who are crossing the Channel. And as the numbers grow, especially during the summer season, then yes, more people are unfortunately taking off border duties elsewhere in the UK at other ports and airports around the UK, leaving them short-staffed and of course causing potential travel problems in those ports and airports as they're brought here to deal with this particular crisis. And already this year we're at 17,500 people who have crossed the English Channel. That's far higher than about the 10,000 total at this point last year. For the total, the whole of last year, it was 28,500 who crossed. We seem to be on target, I think, to at least double that this year. We're probably up to 60,000 crossing the Channel by the end of the year.
Mark White down there for GB News. Alan, the figures are comical, aren't they? The numbers are extraordinary. I can't help but think this is something we could do something about if the will was there.
Well, Bev, you're absolutely right when you said, it's not exactly a surprise, it is high season. It's not as if an army of migrants have come in December and suddenly decided to appear here. Everyone knows this is high season. Everyone knows this has been going on. The government's been going on about it for enough time. And it's, curious people keep on talking, we will get control of it. But for the last X number of years we've been talking about this. Nobody's got control of it. So the answer has to be, it's time to get control of it. Now, we saw, of course, the whole Rwanda plan, for example, being shot down by everyone. The problem with shooting down plans like that, which should have been given a chance to see if they would work first, is, well, what's your alternative? Your alternative cannot be that we must allow people in dangerous circumstances, they're risking their lives, enriching criminal gangs, and then when they get here, they're guaranteed an entrance. That's not the alternative, is it?
No. You just feel like there's not the will somehow for the powers that be. I feel like there's something going on here, that they are just allowing thousands of people to come into the country. There isn't the will to change it. I mean, like you say, Rwanda came on the scene, didn't it? It was just all smelt a bit off, that project from the go. Do you think Priti Patel announced that, did she genuinely think it would work?
Well, I think other countries have looked at this. So Denmark, for example, looked at this as well. Others have, examined similar options. The point of working out whether something works or not is you've got to trial it, don't you, to see if it does work. I thought it was very revealing at the time when all those people got taken off the plane to Rwanda, that when the BBC finally got hold of one person there and said, well, what do you think about this whole scheme? Well, I would have been deterred to come to the UK had this scheme been in operation. So the ironic thing is, it wasn't allowed to succeed, and therefore, as a result, Nobody's got any better solutions, and we just repeat this cycle, hand-wringing year on year. At the same time, people are coming. We don't know if they're legitimate asylum seekers or economic migrants in this sort of way, and as a result, we end up having to cater for them here instead. So it's a very messy situation. Of course, nobody wants to see genuine asylum seekers badly treated, but at the same time, it's clear we've got an illegal migration problem as well as an asylum issue, and those two things need to be considered side by side.
OK, Alan, thank you. It's been lovely to meet you. I haven't met you before either. You're very good. Alan Mendoza, a commentator who's also the executive director of the Henry Jackson Society think tank. We'll probably carry this conversation on in the green room. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for joining me. I will be back at the same time on Monday. Have a wonderful weekend.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather outlook. Not much rain in the forecast across the south. A dry one here today and sunny for most of us through this weekend, thanks to a large area of high pressure that's slowly moving in across the country, and it's going to stick around through the weekend and beyond. This weather front will bring a bit more cloud tomorrow across the north. And today across the north, we do have some showers. We've already seen one or two heavy ones and a scattering of showers over North Wales, northern England and parts of central and eastern Scotland will continue. Hit and miss, not everywhere seeing them, but where they do occur, so the odd heavy one is possible, but tending to ease off, I suspect, through the afternoon. Sunny spells for western Scotland, Northern Ireland and across the south, where temperatures getting into the mid-20s, high teens, low 20s for most. So actually a little cool for the time of year. It'll be a fairly cool evening as well. Still a few showers around this evening if you're heading on the roads across northeast England, eastern Scotland, but they'll quickly fade away. For most, it's going to be a dry night, but that weather front we saw earlier will start to bring the rain back to the Highlands of Scotland and the Western Isles through the early hours. A fresh start to the weekend. It really will be quite a cool night, certainly compared to earlier in the week. Temperatures widely down to single figures. A sunny start to the weekend, certainly for most of England and Wales. A cloudy start for Scotland and Northern Ireland. There will be some rain pushing through parts of Scotland, but come late morning, it'll mostly be confined to the far north, with just a few showers likely through the central belt. The odd shower for Northern Ireland, mostly dry here. Certainly sunny spells for the majority across England and Wales. And after a cool start, feeling pretty warm from mid-morning onwards into the mid-20s through the afternoon. On Saturday evening, again, most places set fair, just a bit more of that rain lingering across northern Scotland, where it'll also be fairly breezy. There'll be some patchy rain across northern and western parts of Scotland on Sunday, but otherwise, again, most places dry, and we are going to see temperatures starting to rise through the weekend into next week.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good afternoon, it's 3 o'clock. My name's Tom Harwood, and you're watching The Briefing. Today on the show, pressure on Rishi Sunak as a leaked